Hey, I'm Alec, and today I'm going to show you the top 10 tips for when you get started with your 3D printer. When I bought my first 3D printer, I made a lot of mistakes. Like, I tried to use a wrench to beat the nozzle back into the hot end because it wasn't fitting. Oops. Well, common sense would say, probably shouldn't do that, but I really didn't have a clue what I was doing. There were a limited number of YouTube videos at the time, or forums with various amounts of organization or disorganization. And because of that, I've compiled this list of different things that would have been really helpful to have then, but now are just second nature. So let's dive into it. Tip number 1, how to level your bed. Nowadays, a lot of 3D printers are coming with automatic bed leveling, and they all use various methods from inductive to actually probing the bed mechanically. But there's still a lot of printers that don't have automatic leveling, but they all sort of rely on the same procedure. First off, if your printer uses 2 Z lead screws, what you're going to want to do is make sure that the X-axis is level all the way across. Because what can happen is it can totally throw off your leveling if the X-axis is at an angle. Now, there are some printers that don't have that, and in which case, don't worry about it. Once you make sure that the X-axis is level, tighten down all of the screws that keep your bed in place. And this just allows you to have enough room between the nozzle and the bed without crashing into it when you home it. Because the next step is homing the Z-axis. Once your Z is at home, move the print head over one of the screws, and it doesn't matter which one. Once it's over the screw, loosen the screw just enough so the bed is almost touching the nozzle. Get a piece of paper, put it between the nozzle and the bed, and keep loosening the screw until there's just a slight amount of resistance between the paper, the nozzle, and the bed. Now, it doesn't need to be gripping it really tight, and you don't want it loose either. You just want it to be gently holding onto the paper. Once you've done that, move to each of the other screws, do the same procedure until they all have the same resistance. After that, go ahead and start a print with the skirt and check on the skirt. If the lines of your skirt are too far apart, you need to move the bed closer to the nozzle. If they're too close, you gotta pull it back. Now, what can happen in either case is if they're too far apart, your part may separate from the bed mid-print. If it's too close, you may need a hammer to get it off the bed, although don't use the hammer, that's a real bad idea. Once you have your bed level and calibrated, it should hold level for a good while. Now, occasionally you may need to go back in and adjust this screw over here or that screw over there, but for the most part, it should stay pretty stable. Tip number 2, knowing how to change filament. When I first started out, I thought that you could change filament just like you would change ink out of an inkjet printer. Just take it out, put in the new one. But that's not the case. What happens is the filament will harden inside the nozzle and form a plug, and if you try to remove it, you'll just break it and have to take apart the whole hot end to get it back out. So in order to actually change the filament, what you need to do is heat up the nozzle to the old printing temperature. So if you have PLA in there, heat it up to PLA temp, which is about 200, or ABS, 230, etc. Once it's heated up, you can pull out the old filament, push in the new filament, and if it's hotter than the old, you'll need to heat it up again. Once it pushes through and you get a good solid clean color of the new filament, you're good to go. There are a variety of different reasons you might want to change your nozzle. From your nozzle is clogged and you just need your printer to be up and running right now and you don't have time to unclog it, or you're trying to experiment with some larger or smaller nozzles so you can print finer detail or thick, strong parts. In either case, we have a video on how to change nozzles and it'll go more in depth than this. But the gist of it is, heat up the nozzle, remove it, screw in the new one, tighten it down when it's hot, and then calibrate the E-steps. Tip number 4, knowing when to use supports. Now, there are some models that are completely unprintable unless you use supports in some form, or by adding supports, you will actually lose some important features. So it's good to be able to know when to add support to a model and when not to, or when to have it everywhere, just on the build plate, things like that. So there are some cases where you wouldn't want to use support. Like looking at this fill, he was printed without support. Even though he has overhangs here, because they aren't more severe than 45 degrees, it doesn't need support. Now, if it were a little steeper at 60, 70, 90 degrees, it would need support. Otherwise, you're going to get drooping along that edge. In other cases, things like bridging won't need support either. So if you look at Phil, he has a hole between his legs, and that didn't need support because of the way it bridged over. If it were a perfectly flat bridge between the 2 points, where you have one side here and here, and it's completely flat across, that wouldn't need support either in most cases. Sometimes there are also models that have internal features like holes or channels that run through the model. And by adding support, you fill those in and make it impossible to remove that support, unless it's dissolvable, of course. Take for example, an e-nail hand. So this hand has channels running through the back of it, through here, and through the bottom. And if you added support, what would happen is you couldn't get that out. And a lot of the e-nail hands are like that. So they're designed specifically to not need support because it would fill those features in otherwise. Like I said before, most models are going to need some form of support, like some of these engine parts I've been printing. So this one was printed with support, and that was just done here in order to keep these pieces, which jut out from the side and aren't a bridge at 90 degrees. It needs something to keep this from looking ugly, like this piece. I printed this without support material, and you can kind of see here that it worked okay, and I'm going to use it since it was a long print, but it's still not the prettiest overhang. Tip number 5, know your bed adhesives. Now there's a huge variety of different bed adhesives, and everyone ends up finding out which one works best for them for most of their uses. Now there's PVA glue stick, which works well for PLA, nylon, and TPU, and then there's Aquanet hairspray, which works well for ABS and works pretty well for PLA and PETG. There's blue painter's tape, which works well for PLA and PETG, even without a heated bed. Or there's Kapton tape, which works really well when paired with hairspray and is a good all-around bed adhesive. There's also Build-Tech, which works really well for most materials, especially when you add a flex plate, so you can really squish in that first layer and then pry it away when you're done. And then there's PEI, which is a plastic that is adhered to glass, and when you print on it hot, the parts stick really well. When it cools, they pop off with no problem. Tip number 6, have the right variety of tools. So over the years, I've accumulated a huge variety of tools, and as such, I've had to organize them in some way, and I've made the spool tool. But to start off with, there's a couple that you're going to want to make sure you have. First one you want to have is a spatula. Now most printers come with a spatula of some form. Usually they have a sharp corner, so if you can, try and round that off just so you don't cut yourself. But if you're looking to upgrade one, a Build-Tech spatula is great since it's rounded, it's thin, and you can get right underneath the edge of your part without any issue. The second thing you're going to want to have on hand are flush cutters. Now these are super useful for getting rid of support material or for just trying to trim up parts that are a little too rough, or even trimming filaments so it's at a point and will go into your extruder really easily. The third thing you're going to want to have is some form of bed adhesive that works well with whatever material you're printing with. The fourth thing you're going to want to have is a set of calipers. And these are useful when you're trying to model something that has to fit in a specific place, or when you're trying to see how big exactly is a 40mm print. The fifth thing you'll want to have is a brass brush. It's soft enough not to mar the nozzle or the heater block of your hot end, but just strong enough to be able to clear away all that burnt gunk that's all over it. The sixth thing you'll need to have on hand are hex wrenches. And these are helpful when you need to open up your printer for maintenance or upgrades, or when you're trying to assemble multi-part models. Tip number 7, scrape away from yourself. I know way too many people, myself included, that have wounded ourselves with 3D printer spatulas. And it's really not that hard to wound yourself either. All it takes is a little too much force and a slip, and suddenly you need 8 stitches. So be careful, just try and wedge the spatula underneath the corner, and if you need to, give it a gentle tap with the back of a screwdriver just to get the part out. So just be careful. Tip number 8, ask questions. We were all new to 3D printing at one point, and you have to be kind of bad at something before you can get good at something. So don't be afraid when something that seems like it should be really easy to fix just isn't working for you. So post on forums, go to Reddit, go to our forums, go to YouTube. Do whatever you can to figure out what's wrong with it, and be descriptive. So post your print settings, what printer, are there upgrades, what filament are you using? Anything you can think of, post it. The more descriptive you are, the better. The more easily somebody can come along and help you. Tip number 9, be a knowledge sponge. Now that sounds weird, but what I mean is, read anything you can when you see it about how to fix a printer. You may not have the issue right now, but you may have it a week or even months down the line. I've had it happen to me where I read something, thought it was interesting, and didn't think much more about it. Sure enough, about a month later when I'm building my own 3D printer, I'm seeing those issues come up and I knew exactly how to fix it. Tip number 10, don't be afraid to reprint. Now when I first started, I treated my filament like it was worth its weight in gold. If I printed something and it didn't look great, no problem, I'm just going to sand it anyways. But it will really save you a lot of time by fixing things in the front end rather than in the back end. Take for example some of these fills. I have printed fills in a variety of colors we have, and I'm trying to print them in every filament we have. And a couple times they come out just terrible, so I throw them away. Each fill is only about $1's worth of materials, so it's not much trouble to just reprint a new one. Plus Plus, it looks a lot better once you get it right. And that's it. Those are 10 tips that would have been super helpful to me when I first started 3D printing. But if that doesn't answer all your questions, feel free to call MatterHackers, give us an email, post on the forums. We're here to help. I'm Alec from MatterHackers. Thanks for watching. Now go start printing.
Thank you for watching. If you liked that, subscribe to our channel to keep up to date with all of our videos. And remember, go to MatterHackers.com to shop for everything 3D printing.